Have you ever been in the middle of a language test, looked at a question, and just thought, why on earth are they asking me this? Well, you're not alone. And it turns out there's a hidden logic to it all, a kind of blueprint that test makers use to build every single question you've ever answered. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and uncover that blueprint together. So let's put ourselves in their shoes. Imagine you have to build a language test from the ground up. Where would you even start? It seems kind of complicated, right? You've got to think about what you're trying to find out, how you're going to ask, what the questions will look like, but trust me, it's not nearly as chaotic as it seems. You see, pretty much every single test out there, from a little pop quiz in class to a massive international exam, is built on just three fundamental decisions. Let's call it the test maker's journey. It starts with, why are you testing in the first place? Then, how are you going to test it? And finally, what will the actual questions look like? That's it, the why, the how, and the what. All right, let's dive into the first and honestly, the most important choice of all, the why. Before a single question gets written, a test maker has to be absolutely crystal clear about the goal. What information are they really trying to get with this test? And it turns out, you can boil down the purpose of almost every test you've ever taken into one of four main categories. Once you know the goal, everything else starts to make a whole lot more sense. First up is the one we all know the one we all know from school, the achievement test. This test is all about looking backward. Its one and only job is to measure how well you learned the stuff that was covered in a specific class or from a specific textbook. You know, like that final exam in your high school French class. Okay, next we have the proficiency test. This one couldn't care less about the textbook you used. It's designed to measure your overall real-world language skills for some future goal, like getting into a university or qualifying for a job. Think of the big ones, like the TOEFL or IELTS exams. That's a proficiency test. Now, some tests aren't about getting a grade at all. A diagnostic test is kind of like a doctor's visit for your language skills. Its whole purpose is to find out what's gone wrong, to pinpoint your specific weaknesses so a teacher knows exactly what you need to work on next. And finally, there's the really forward-looking one, the aptitude test. This one is all about predicting the future. It tries to figure out how well someone might do at learning a new language they haven't even started yet. It's all about measuring your potential for success. Okay, so once the why is locked in, the test maker moves on to the how. This part is all about the style and the delivery of the test itself. And what you'll see here is a series of choices, usually between two competing approaches. First, they have to decide on the vibe, you know? Is this a formal test? We're talking a big, high-stakes, controlled exam that's going to determine your grade? Or is it more of an informal assessment, like a teacher just watching you in a class discussion to get a feel for your progress day to day? This next distinction is absolutely crucial. Is the test for learning or of learning? A formative test is for learning. It happens during a course to give you feedback and help you get better. But a summative test is of learning. It happens at the very end to give you a final grade. It's the summary of what you learned. Then you've got this question of, well, how real is it? A direct test is beautifully simple. If you want to test someone's writing, you make them write an essay. Easy. An indirect test, on the other hand, measures an underlying skill, like using a multiple-choice quiz to test grammar rules. It's not as real-world, sure, but it's way easier and cheaper to grade objectively for thousands of people. Another big choice is about how much you're juggling. A discrete point test breaks language down into tiny, bite-sized pieces. It tests just one thing at a time, like a single vocabulary word. But an integrative test forces you to pull multiple skills together at once. Like when you do a dictation, you have to listen, understand, and write all at the same time. And finally, how do we even interpret the score? Is it norm-referenced, where your score only makes sense when you compare it to everyone else who took the test, like being in the top 10%? Or is it criterion referenced, where you're measured against a fixed standard, like you need to get 70% of the questions right to pass? All right, we're on to the final step in the journey. We figured out the why, the purpose, and the how, the style. Now it's time for the what. This is where the rubber meets the road, the actual design of the questions on the page. You can really think of this as a spectrum of control. On one end, you have totally objective, closed-ended questions like multiple choice. They're quick, they're reliable, they're super easy to grade. On the complete opposite end, you have subjective, open-ended questions like essays. They're a lot harder to grade, but they really show you what a student can produce on their own. And of course, right there in the middle, you have things like fill in the blanks, which are kind of the best of both worlds. So there we have it, the complete blueprint, the why, the how, and the what. Now, the best way to really get this is to see it in action. So let's try to classify a few real-world tests using our new toolkit. Okay, here's our first case study. Take a second to read it. Using our framework, the why, the how, and the what, how would you classify this thing? Feel free to pause here if you really want to think it through. All right, you're ready? Let's break it down. First, the why. It's for university entrance to measure general ability. That makes it a proficiency test. The how. It's a big, standardized exam, so it's formal. It uses multiple choice for grammar, which is an indirect and discrete point way to test. And finally, the scores are compared to a national average, so it's norm referenced. See how all the pieces just click into place? Okay, round two. Let's try another one. This is a super common classroom situation. A teacher gives a quick little quiz on one specific grammar point just to see if the class is getting it. What do you think?
Let's walk through this one. So, the why. The teacher's looking for a specific weakness to decide if she needs to reteach. That is a classic diagnostic test. The how. It's happening during the course to give feedback, so it's formative. The score. The teacher just needs to know if the students hit a certain standard of understanding, so it's criterion referenced. And the format, rewriting a sentence, that's a perfect example of a restricted response question.
All right, last one. And this one's a big deal. A final essay that actually determines if a student graduates. So super high stakes and a totally different kind of task. How would we classify this one? Okay, final breakdown, let's do it. The why. It's at the end of the year, measuring everything they learned in the course. That's a textbook achievement test. The how. It's a final judgment on their learning, so it's summative. And because you have to actually write to prove you can write, it's a direct test. And finally, the what? Well, an essay is the ultimate open-ended format. So there you go, the secret blueprint behind every language test. The why, the how, and the what. Now the power's in your hands. So think about it. The last test you took, for any subject, not just language, using this framework, how would you classify it? Now you know how to figure it out.